you'll notice that it says trafficked. When I was talking to this young lady, her name is Jonte, Revon, Pham. Sounds very French and then a little bit of Asian mixed in with that, doesn't it? Very beautiful girl. And about an hour and a half after she was sharing my testimony, I was like, okay, stop. You just get on this emotional overload because of what some of these women have been through. So we plucked out and picked certain things from her story, and we called it Trafficked. Well, obviously, we just saw Trafficked. That was some hardcore, wasn't it? Well, I called her up and I said, we need to change gears. So what would you, just throw a word out there that's really hardcore. What's a good word that would represent a hardcore story? Brutal. Okay, so that's perfect. I'm going to remember that. I'm going to put that on the website. So Jonte Revon Pham, please help me welcome her. The name of her story is Brutal. i.e. trafficked.
Okay. I was going to look for the mic, but I guess I already have it on. So I'm going to do like a small little icebreaker. Poetry is my way of doing that, so it's going to be really short and really nice. Okay. She picked up a mirror and held it up to see all the things that were behind her, all the things that would constantly remind her of who she was. They were visible, but not to her naked eye. She couldn't look directly at them if she tried. So every time she wanted to remember, she'd pick up this mirror so she could see a life of memory. And that's it. Okay. So today I wanted to share with you my story on abortion. I'm actually a mother of 4. It's funny because every time you go, and those of you who are mothers, you know, every time you go to a doctor's office, they ask you, well, how many pregnancies have you had? So I've had 8, and I have 4 living children. I had 1 ectopic pregnancy, and I've had 3 abortions. When I was 16 years old, I had got pregnant with my first daughter. It wasn't the most picturesque pregnancy, of course not, at the age of 16, but I had gotten pregnant with her, and at that time, I was really, really bad. When I was younger, I had dealt with a lot of things. I had a mother that was a drug addict and all of that stuff. So drug addict, I ended up one day following almost in her exact footsteps. She was a drug addict. She was sexually abused, and I ended up being sexually abused and becoming a drug addict too. I had really low self-worth, a really low self-image of who I was, and just I didn't have a good picture of myself. I hated the person I saw when I looked at myself. So I was always seeking attention, I guess you could say. And luckily, I always got it, but it was in the eyes of like men or in the eyes of other people. So when I was 16 years old and I got pregnant with my first daughter, I was still really immature. I was still a drug addict at that time, so I had been using and been doing all of these crazy things that I was already doing. I think about a month. No, it wasn't a month. Sorry, guys. It was like about a year after I had had my first daughter, I had gotten pregnant again. I gotten pregnant by this guy who was so sweet to me. He was somebody who just really liked me. He adored me, and when you're in these situations or in these relationships with people when you're younger, to be looked at in any way that's different from the way that you look at yourself, it's something that's just so intoxicating. I mean, you want to be loved, you want to be liked, you want people to see you for the person like you wished you would be, but not all of your insecurities. So that's what this person was for me. When I had gotten pregnant from him, he had told me, he was like, well, he's like, I want to go to school. I have all these dreams I want. And all of these things, right? And I already had a daughter. So my first abortion was kind of a very easy decision for me to make. I was 17 years old when I made it. I was still in high school. My first one was actually my friend from school. Her mom was the person who did my procedure. I had went behind my mom's back without my mom even knowing that I was going, and I went to my friend's house early in the morning. I went to work with her, so I think it was like 3 a.m. when I went with her. She walked me into the room, and she just explained the process to me. And it was going to be one that was going to be really easy. She just told me that I'm going to go under anesthesia. So basically, I'm going to wake up and everything's going to be done. And that's exactly what it was. I woke up and everything was done. And so that was my first abortion. I continued staying with the first person, with that same guy that I was with, and I really, really, really loved him. And I remember when it came time for me to have my second abortion, I was already at this stage with him, like where I was willing to do whatever I had. I mean, it's weird because when you're in that state of mind and you're contemplating whether having an abortion, not having an abortion, in your mind you're like, well, like, I want to keep this person that I love versus me, like, keeping somebody that I've never met, meaning the child. You know, and so when you look at it in that perspective, it's a really easy decision to make. So my second abortion would be I was 5 months pregnant. This one was a 2-day procedure. I had went in and they give you a pill. It was kind of like I already knew what to expect, what was going to happen. And this one was a little more heartbreaking for me, though, because it wasn't just me getting this abortion. I knew that, like, my boyfriend at that time, his family was the one who paid for this abortion. So it made me feel really bad, like, about myself. You know, it made me feel like, okay, like, I don't want to force you to be with me. And that's how I felt. I felt like if I had this child, like, the vibe I was getting is that, like, he felt like I was forcing him to stay with me, you know, and that's what I didn't want to do. I mean, I already had learned from my first daughter that that's not something I wanted to do again. I didn't want to be in a situation to where I was, you know, left to raise a child on my own by myself with somebody who did not want it with me at all. So that came my second abortion, and this one, it was a little bit harder, but still easy for me to do. Okay, so after this, some time went by, and I ended up getting pregnant again and again. I ended up meeting the man who's now my husband. I got pregnant a month and a half after meeting him, very soon after I had met him. And I got pregnant with my son, who I do have. But during these pregnancies, I was still a drug addict. I was a drug addict the whole time. I had been using since I was 9. So in my mind, with him, with my son, I wanted my son because the man that I was with wanted him too. So that was like, okay, you know, like maybe this could be something that, like, we could do, something that can be a little more normal. So we ended up having my son, and addiction was still a part of it's still a part of what we were doing. And not only that, with addiction comes a lot of other things. There was a lot of physical abuse, there was a lot of mental abuse, there was a lot of abuse, period. After I had had my son, I had gotten pregnant again. My children are 6, 5, and 4, right? But I had gotten pregnant with our second child. And during this pregnancy, this one was one that was really hard for me too. And if I'm being completely honest with you, in my mind, I didn't want this child either. And the thing that kept me, because it was so easy for me, because the times I had done it before, it was so easy for me to do. And so in my mind, I kept on using, and that was going to be my reason that I made up in my mind for having this abortion. But obviously, like, the Lord intervened, and I didn't have that abortion. I ended up moving to Arizona, and when I lived there, things were really bad. This was probably like at the peak of my addiction, and just like the mental abuse, the physical abuse as well. I ended up getting pregnant again. And at this point, like, because of how everything had played out, how our life was like really bad. My mom was paying half of our rent, like we were really struggling to survive. And struggling to survive as an addict is never like a picturesque thing anyway, and having these children that were with me and like looking at them and just seeing all the hurt and all the pain that I was putting them through, and knowing just like, like I don't even know how to explain it. It was the most heartbreaking thing to just watch them, though, to watch them and to watch me being the person who was hurting them so much, So I ended up getting pregnant again. And this would be my last abortion. I actually got the date tattooed on me. I wish I was somebody who could say I remembered it, but I don't. So I'm going to look. And it is 3/31/12. This abortion in Arizona was way different than my abortions in Los Angeles. In Arizona, I was 6 months pregnant at this time. So this would be my one furthest along. And in Arizona, they do things a lot differently. They give you, it was a 2-day procedure too, but in the process, there is no anesthesia. They give you a pill to sedate you, so you're still awake and you're still aware of what you're doing. I remember I'm in this room, and they first walked me in and they asked me, they're like, do you want an ultrasound? And I didn't understand like why I would want an ultrasound, but for some reason, I was somebody who liked to feel the weight of my decisions. I don't even know why I did it, but I went into the room, I got the ultrasound, I saw the baby on the monitor. I remember asking the lady, I was like, can you tell me the sex of it? And she's like, no, we can't tell you. And I was like, okay. So I remember going into the room and just thinking in my head, like, oh my gosh, like I was terrified. I was terrified this time. We had put up all of our money for rent to even pay for this abortion. So this abortion was one that was just going to forever change me. I was in this really small room, and there was all these seats with there was like 2 rows, right? And it went like this. And I was sitting all the way at the end because I wanted to just look at and observe the people around me, and I remember every girl in there just looked terrified. I remember they were all just sitting there with their heads, with their heads down, and, and everybody just had this same blank expression on their face. Like, it looked like disgrace, So we were all just sitting there, and I remember this pill that they had given me, because I had already been up for like 3 days, because I was on drugs and stuff. This pill that they gave me made me fall asleep, right? Everybody in the room was cleared when I finally woke up. There was nobody in that room except me. And I had my head down, and I lifted my head up. And I remember the lady walking in, and she's like, okay. She's like, you're still in here? And I was just like, yeah. I was like, I fell asleep. And then so she gave me another pill, right? Because obviously it was going to wear off if I fell asleep the way I did. She gave me another pill, and they rushed me into this room. I go into this really small room, and it seems like business was about to be over, and everyone was in a really big hurry. I get into this really small room, and she walks me in there, and I remember she's just looking at me, and I'm looking at this bed because it's like a medical bed, right? I'm looking at this medical bed, and it's set up exactly how it would be set up if you're having a child. Like, it had the two things that you put your legs on. And I remember looking at it and just looking at the people in the room, and I was terrified because the other times I was asleep. You know, I went under anesthesia. I didn't get to see it. So I remember I walked in there. She laid me on the bed, and she told me to scoot all the way to the bottom, to keep on scooting, and keep my legs up. So I'm doing that, and I remember my whole body was shaking. And it was weird because the whole thing seemed so rushed. It seemed so rushed. And I remember just staring at her, and I remember they had all of these tools right there. And they also had this really big, like, it looked like a glass jar thing, like with like this pump thing in it, right? So they put me in this room, they put my legs up, and I see like the tube go inside me, and I start screaming, and so she goes behind me and she holds me down, and she's like holding me down so I'm not moving because I was moving a lot. She's like, you can't move. And I remember nobody was there with me that day. I went there by myself. My boyfriend wasn't there with me that day or anything, but I remember looking up at her and looking into her eyes, and I just felt so sad. I was so sad, and I was so hurt because above all the horrible things I had done, above me being the drug addict that I was, and all the things that I had ever done, I never felt that I consented to doing something really, really evil, like how I did feel like I did that day. I felt like what I was doing was so evil, and I felt like there was just so much darkness in this room. And I remember I just closed my eyes, just like the million other times I closed my eyes when I was younger and I wanted to get out of my head. I remember closing my eyes and taking myself to a different place. And then it was over. I had looked over, and I seen that whole jar, that was empty, full of blood. And I remember I was just looking at it, and I hated myself. I couldn't believe what I had just done and what I had paid to do. Like, I gave money to do this really evil thing. I remember walking out, and I didn't have nothing to say. I didn't have nothing to say for myself. I remember going home, and I didn't even know how to respond or how to react or how to do anything anymore. I was so hurt and so ashamed of what I had just done. I remember talking to my boyfriend and telling him what just happened. And I remember, there wasn't that much of an expression on his face, but at the same time, what kind of expression could he really give? It wasn't something that he saw like the way I saw it that day. So I remember going into the room, and I had known God. I wasn't, of course, serving God, but I knew who God was, and I remember praying. I told God, I just looked up and I cried out to him, and I told him how sorry I was, and how sorry I was for the times that I did it before, the times that I don't even remember when I did it. And I just cried out to him, and I told him, I was like, God, if you ever give me another opportunity or a chance ever again, I will never, ever do this again. And a month and a half after that, I got pregnant with my last child. I was reading the scripture, and it just really, this part really stood out to me. We must see with our eyes and understand with our hearts in turn so that God can heal us. Before, my eyes were blind because I didn't see what I did. You know, I didn't understand the weight of my decisions. And it took me seeing everything the way that I saw it in order for me to see it, in order for my heart to understand it, in order for me to truly, truly repent, for that sorrow to just come up in me where I knew for a fact like that would be something that I would never, ever do again. And no matter all of the reasons that we have for making those decisions, and trust me, I know when you're younger, these decisions come so much easier because they're mainly they're influenced. You know, you'll do anything to like be with the person you're with, and you know, there's so much control, so much mind manipulation behind all of those things. But when God opens your eyes in a way that you're never going to be the same after that day forever changed me. I didn't change after that. I had encountered God. I think it was probably like 6 months after I had my last child. God supernaturally came in and he saved me when I was at my absolute lowest point. But and this is a crazy thing. I had went into the restroom right before I came in here, and you know how my story got changed. And when I looked on the counter, I saw this little baby, you know, and I had never seen this before, but or maybe one of you left it in there. I don't know. But I saw this little baby, and this was just such confirmation for me, like what God wanted me to speak about today. And so, thank you. So, I just want to, and also I think I have some time too, so I could also talk to you about my original one, trafficked. But that's my story about my abortions. God really opened my eyes to it, and it's really, really amazing how the love of God is. You know how growing up you always hear these words like having abortion is an abomination and all of these things. When you start receiving that for yourself, like what I did is an abomination, you know, like, and you start claiming that as your identity, those things could just completely like disable you from functioning and growing in God. So once you start believing the truth of who you are, the truth that like even when you're in your deepest, most darkest state, God's love could still resonate within you. When you start seeing yourself from that view, you just see how much God truly, truly loves you. So this love that you're chasing after your whole entire life, like it's all there and it's all in the Father's arms. So that's my story on abortion. So I want to share with you my testimony is, I hate even saying the word story because I'm not really sharing stories, but my testimony is so long, it's so broken up. Like I told you, like there's abuse, drug abuse, you know, like it could go on and on and on. So when I had first heard about doing this conference, my topic was trafficked. When I say that, it was really hard for me to even say that word, trafficked, because when I think of someone being trafficked, I think from them being placed from place to place to place to place to place, you know, like travel. Do you know what I mean? Like you have like this Hollywood version of what trafficked is in your mind. So I never let that be what I called that. Like, until like somebody else called it that. They're like, you're trafficked. And I was like, okay. You know, like, but to me, like, I never saw it as that. When I was younger, like around 16 years old, I had this best friend who I had done everything with. She was the light of my world, the only person who understood like my true dark way of thinking. So we were we were best friends, you know. As you could tell, I like tattoos. My first tattoo was actually from the person. Well, he was a person who hooked this up for me. Um, the person who ended up trafficking me was the one who got me my first tattoo, and that's my biggest tattoo on my back. So when I was younger, right, I used to do everything with her, and we used to get into so much trouble. One day she told me, like, hey, let's go get tattoos, and she had this really cool dragon tattoo on her back. So I was like, oh, you know, like, I think I wanted to be like her, kind of, you know. So I was like, oh, I'm going to go and get one too. So we go there, and the person who was doing the tattoos was, like, trading the tattoos for, like, drugs and stuff, and the person who I ended up meeting, he was the one who was a drug dealer. So he's the one who traded the drugs to get me my tattoos. He was somebody who seemed really, really nice, really, really charming. He was actually somebody who was hooking up with my best friend. So that's how I initially met this guy. I ended up going home with this humongous tattoo on my back, and my mom was all shocked. I remember she was telling me, if you're gonna get something, get like a small butterfly. But I wanted to be all gangster, so I wasn't gonna get a butterfly, you know. I was like, okay, you know. So I got this humongous koi fish. And I remember, like, so, you know, when you get a tattoo, you have to go get the shading done after you get the lining done. So I was, like, becoming friends with, like, this guy and, like, his friends, right? Anyway, during this time, my mom had been having me go to church, which apparently, like, obviously, I didn't want to be in church at all. You know, like, I was the bad one in church too. You know, like, I was the one that, I mean, the Lord saved me. But I was the one who, like, they would take to youth conferences, and I would sneak in alcohol and give all the youth alcohol. I was that one, the one that you never wanted around anyone, you know. So she kept trying to get me into church, and I kept trying to show her it wasn't going to work, you know. Well, one day we had all these plans to go and do, like, all of these crazy things, right? And I remember it was a church day. My mom had put me in the car, and she told me, she's like, okay, she's like, we're going to church. And I was like, no, I have something I need to do. And she's like, you want, and like I told you, I already had my first daughter. She's like, no, like, you're going to go to church, and you're going to be with, you know, you're going to be with Katie and all of this stuff. And I was like, okay. I was like, yeah, I'm not going. And she's like, well, if you don't go to church, you're going to have to go. You know, you have to leave. And don't come back home and all that stuff. So that, to me, sounded great. I was like, okay, I'm going to leave then. You know, I go to my best friend's house. Of course, I couldn't stay there because her mom hated me with a passion because of how bad of an influence she thought I was. So my best friend ended up calling that guy who got my tattoo. And he was like, yeah, Jonte could come and stay with me, you know. So he comes and he picks me up, and I'm staying at his house, and he's, like, being really nice to me, you know. Like, he was a drug dealer, so I had all the drugs I wanted. I had no responsibilities. Everything seemed really great, you know. And one day he had told me, like, we're going to go and we're going to meet some people, and, you know, like, just get dressed up really nice. And I was like, okay. And for some reason, he was telling me to say that I was Japanese and white. And I didn't understand why, but I was just like, okay. You know, like, I'll say I'm Japanese and white. And then we go to this place, and there's, like, this really, like, just this businessman. You know, he had a suit on, and it was actually here in Orange County. He had a suit on, and there was this beautiful, beautiful woman. And I guess, like, from really beautiful people, you really don't expect ugly things, because I didn't, you know. So when meeting them, this beautiful woman came to me, and she was just talking to me, and she had told me, like, oh, like, let's go over here, and we went to go look at, like, some jade bracelets, right? Because we were, like, at this, like, tea house. We look at these jade bracelets, and I come back to the table, and my friend who I was with was gone. And I was like, oh, where's so-and-so? And they're like, he had to go and do something. He's like, but just come with us, and we'll take you back to him. And I was like, okay. So I get in the car with them, and we pull up to this condo. And I'm confused, thinking he's going to come out of the car. They're like, "Oh, okay, like get off." They open up the garage, and I walk through the garage doors into the other door. And once I walk in there, I walk into this place that's completely empty. The only thing in there was like this couch, and this like Buddhist shrine, but there was nothing else in there. It was an empty house. So he walks me upstairs, and there's the restroom, a bedroom. He walks me into the bedroom on the right, and I remember looking in there, and there was nothing in there either. My friend wasn't in there. And all I saw was this yoga mat that was there, and it was laid on the floor. And I remember looking at him, really confused, not really knowing what was going on. And he shut the door behind me, and he told me to sit down. And I was like, okay. He's like, I need you to do whatever I ask you to do. He's like, you're gonna have sex with me right now. He's like, and every other person who comes in here. He's like, after each person, you need to go and take a shower in the restroom, and then come back in here, and then every single time you're just gonna do that. And he's like, but after you're done, he's like, we'll take you back to your friend. And I remember looking at him like, what the heck did I, and I was really confused, really scared. But I guess when I was in that situation, you go on this whole like survival mode, and you're just like, okay, then I'm gonna do what you asked me to do. So first was him, and then I think it was like 6 to 8 men. And each and every person in there, from a person being really young to people being extremely old. I remember just every person who came into that room. It was just, I don't even know how to explain. Sorry, I feel nauseous. Explain just the dirtiness, the disgusted feeling I felt with what I was doing. I knew that after all of this was done, that it's weird, because in my mind I was so focused on how other people were going to view me after this, like about, like when I get out of here, and like I talk to my friends, like how they're going to see me. I used to have this crazy nickname named KO, because I was somebody who used to fight a lot, and I knew that this thing was going to completely shatter my image that I made for myself, because no longer was I the strong person. I just became the weak person. I became the used person. So that went on. I did exactly what he told me to do. Each person who came in, I did what I had to do until they were done, and then I showered, went back into the room, and that just happened over and over and over. I remember I walked in that place, it was day. When I walked out, it was night. And right after that, he had picked me up, as he promised, and he took me to my friend. I remember getting to my friend and looking at him and not saying anything to him. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how I was going to get out of the situation I was in. He ended up taking me back home to his house, and the next day he tried to get me to do that again, and I told him that I wasn't going to. After that, he completely switched on me. He turned from being this nice, compassionate person to somebody who he socked me in my face. He pulled a gun out on me. He took me into this room that I had been staying in, and he put the gun in my mouth, and he was just saying all of these horrible things to me, accusing me of being an FBI agent and just like all these weird random things. And I remember just complete terror filling my mind. I didn't know who this guy was. The person that I knew was somebody who was nice, somebody who was friendly, somebody who my best friend brought me to. I didn't know this person who was threatening to kill me. And I remember in my mind, all I was thinking about was my daughter. That's the only thing that went through my mind. How stupid, and the words I was speaking to myself was, you're stupid. It was your fault that this happened because you put yourself in this situation. You trusted that person, and that's why this is happening to you. I don't know how much time went by, but some time went by, and he ended up completely just like turning all crazy. And I ended up telling him, you want to know what, if you were going to kill me, you would have killed me already. So he took the gun out of my mouth, and he's like, dang, that's what I love about you. You're so down. And I was like, okay, So, but he had the gun out of my mouth, so I was fine with that. I ran out, I jumped over the fence, and I ran to a 7-Eleven, and it was filled with police officers. And that's how I got out of that. That's how I got out of that situation. But I just want you guys to know, I know that it's probably weird that I shared one story to another story, but I just want you to know that throughout my whole life, with all the darkness, with all the terror, with all the despair, like God was always there with me. He was always there with me. He was always there. And so, let me see if I have time. Yeah, he was always there with me. And when God's pursuing you, there's nothing that you could ever do to stop him from this hunt that he has after you. He will find you in the deepest, most darkest places, covered in all of your disgraces, and he will just find you, he'll grab you, he'll love you, he'll lavish you, and he'll make you completely new. It's amazing when you find out. I mean, you know how like sometimes people hate to be wrong? Well, I loved that I was wrong. I love that this whole image of who I thought I was my whole entire life, God completely shattered that. I love when he shattered that. I love when the person I saw was non-existent anymore. When I became this courageous, this bold, this extremely loving and compassionate person. This person who was becoming like Jesus. You know how there's that scripture that says that we hold up a mirror and we become, I don't know why I forgot that scripture. but we hold up a mirror and I don't know. I'm just not going to, let me just let that one go. But it's funny, my mom's in the audience, but she knows that like she's like my backup with my scriptures. When I don't say it, she covers them all. Take it from here. But she usually like jumps in and covers it for me. So, but anyway, like the more we behold him, the more we become like him. And that's what was happening with me. All of the things that I thought about myself, all of the horrible things that I saw in myself, day by day they were stripping away. When God started telling me to speak of these things that I would have died to keep hidden. I mean, nobody wants to go up and talk about all the abortions they had. Nobody wants to go up and say, I did drugs while being pregnant. Nobody wants to claim those things because those are ugly things. Those are things that are even fearful things to say because you could get your children taken away. So when God told me to say those things that I was most terrified of saying, and he just began to break fear off of me, and I just want to encourage you, when God puts courage inside of you and he tells you to go forward and to just speak on those things that you would have died to keep hidden, I just want to encourage you to do that. Sometimes we go into things terrified, not knowing what to think, not knowing. But God will never, ever let you be put to shame. He'll never let you be disgraced. He will wipe all of the sadness and disgrace from your face, and he'll never let you, ever let you look the way that you looked before. You know, each one of you are bold, you're courageous, you were made after God's image. And I just know that each one of you are world changers. You're going to do something so amazing and so magnificent. So don't ever limit your story. Your story is God's glory. And the more you speak it, the more glorified he is. Because you want to know what you're showing the world? You're not showing the world this disgusting, ugly person you were. You're showing the world how beautiful the Father is, how beautiful his love is. So thank you for listening to my story, and that's it. Thank you.